Assigning a shadow value on activities that are not revenue generating, I think, was probably the hardest part after the mapping exercise of the partners, because it's really opinion based in reality. Once you're assigning a value that doesn't exist, that doesn't translate an actual hard metric.
Hello, and welcome to the Strategic Partnerships podcast series. My name is Sarah Jabber, Director at UIIN, and your host for today. In this week's episode, we're in for an enlightening conversation with Daria Cecchini, who at the time was Associate Director of Industry Engagement at Swinburne University of Technology. At the 2023 UIN conference, Daria and her team received the Strategic Partnerships Award for their innovative framework aimed at identifying, strengthening, and managing strategic partners at Swinburne University. In this episode, Daria delves into their motivations behind developing the framework, the practical steps they took in its creation, and how they will be using it going forward. Join us for a fascinating journey of innovation and excellence in partnership management. I'm really excited to be hosting today's chat with Daria Cecchini, who's Associate Director of Industry Engagement at Swinburne University of Technology in Melbourne. At the 2023 UIN conference, she won the Strategic Partnerships Award for the work that her and her colleagues have done developing this framework to identify, build, strengthen, and consistently manage Swinburne strategic partners. At Swinburne, Daria is responsible for managing these key industry partnerships, and this project has been a milestone project you've been working on, Daria, to really drive industry engagement and develop a consistent approach for how you manage strategic partners at Swinburne University of Technology. Through the work we've done with universities, especially in our strategic partnerships program, we focus a lot on developing these evidence-based approaches and the interplay through strategy, leadership, partnership frameworks, and support structures, and culture and communication. And I think, Daria, through the work you've done, you've really nailed all of these elements. And as we mentioned, in the promotion of this event, it really is a good practice example for managing strategic partnerships. I'm sure everyone's excited to hear more about it. I did listen to your presentation at the conference and I really enjoyed it. So I'm very much looking forward to digging in a little bit deeper and learning more about the framework. But before we get into the details, Daria, I'd really like to understand a bit more around the importance of industry engagement at Swinburne, and therefore, what were the motivations for developing this framework?
Thank you, Sarah. It's been a 2-year process, but it's really changed the way we approach our strategic partners, particularly for Swinburne. Industry engagement is at the core of what the university does. We're a dual sector university that focuses a lot on technology. Work integrated learning has been a cornerstone of what Swinburne has always done, and industry engagement pervades everything that we do. And as our Vice Chancellor often says, it's really everybody's business. So we go from research to ability to our teaching and learning delivery. Industry engagements is headed through all of these activities. So it's really important for us to be able to manage it consistently, ensure that our partners have a good customer experience, and also for us as an industry engagement team know that we're really trying to improve and innovate in the way that we manage our partners. That kicked off the idea around the project, and to try and identify and improve the transparency around our partners. And that's what was the motivator for us to kick off this work. As I said, every area has its industry partners, and from our perspective, trying to identify the ones across the university that have strategic importance.
The term, as you said, improving transparency, that's really important. We see sometimes with universities that not everyone might be aware of who are our strategic partners or what even is a strategic partner for the university. And I noticed, I'll get a bit to the process you went through, but I noticed that one of the first steps, and of course, correct me if that's wrong, but one of the first steps you took was to really define or to agree on what is a partner for Swinburne and how do we engage with industry. And I think that's a really important element because it can vary by university to university. It can also vary within the university. So I'm curious, how did that process go and what did you land on?
You're absolutely right. It does vary across every area has their own partner, but yes, the definition does vary. And we were trying to, from the initial discussions was, okay, what are the inclusions? What are the exclusions? How are we going to go about mapping our partners? Because that's the first step was, okay, how far do we go in trying to define these partners? Essentially, we landed on basically encompassing all the partners that actually have some form of activity with the university. So we went from our procurement partners through to our research partners, including partners that work with us for curriculum development, that provide work experience to our students, that provide jobs to our students once they leave the university. So really trying to go from being as broad as we could, we really decided to include them all, and also to make sure that by defining industry partner, we're actually defining industry as a whole, any sort of business operation that's outside of the university. So that would include our not-for-profits, healthcare providers, for instance. Industry is an all-encompassing term from our perspective. But yes, that was definitely the first step. And even what you do really at the beginning is you land on a definition and see what falls outside of it. And so because of that, then we need to include certain, like our healthcare providers, because we've got nursing students, for instance. So it was important for us to be really comprehensive. And then the mapping process kicked off after that, trying to have every department submit their top partners, which gave us a good overview of what all the university areas were doing.
Maybe to learn a bit more about the process, you had, I think, 4 phases, right? Discovery, design, implementation, and evaluation. You talked a bit around the discovery, so the getting input from the different faculties, from different people, defining what is a partner and the ways we engage. What were some of the other steps that you took in the development of this framework?
Yeah, I think the second phase is more of a design phase, and that's when we started to go, okay, so how do we actually interact with industry? How does Swinburne work with industry? And because we're a dual sector and because we are so heavily invested in our industry partnerships, we had to map as a product offering all the various ways in which Swinburne works with the industries, from employability, work integrated learning, to curriculum development, corporate training, all of them. So we listed all of them, then went through even a phase of divide them up into sectors a little bit of macro areas, so we know what we're looking at in terms of engagement, and also defining what the ROI looks like on these activities. So assigning a shadow value on activities that are not revenue generating, I think, was probably the hardest part after the mapping exercise of the partners, because it's really opinion based in reality. Once you're assigning a value that doesn't exist, that doesn't translate an actual hard metric, there's got a lot of variance. We did a few trials. We came up with some clear shadow values, and we applied the same for everybody. So at least, even if it is opinion based, we're putting them all through the same criteria. So at least when it comes up in terms of the tiering, they've all been put through the same metrics.
Yeah, so in the end, that's what you're trying to achieve, right? Some consistent approach to evaluation, to measurement that's not based always on personal feelings or opinions.
That's precisely. And the personal feelings is a big one. There are some big partnerships across the universities, but obviously in any business that are well known to be your strategic key accounts. Everybody knows that, but there's a lot of others that have been uncovered through this process simply because the dots were not connected through. So we knew that they were doing really great research, but did we know that they were also giving us, for instance, scholarships or taking our students in for work integrated learning? And being able to connect all this information did highlight the partners that have both the breadth and the depth of the activity at Swinburne. In the design phase, we also developed the assessment criteria. So it's customized, I would say, would have to be customized for any business. We landed on 6 specific criteria for Swinburne that measure alignment, the breadth and depth, the ROI, the brand impact as well, which is really important to us, strategic fit, because the industry engagement team is not very big. We really need to be both smart and clever in the way we work, but also strategically focused when we work with our industry partners. They really need to speak to our Horizon 2025 strategy. So that was our guiding principle in developing these criteria, and the commitment sort of that measures the repeat business that we get from a partner.
Also really interesting to hear you say, when you talk about the return on investment, it's not just focus on the financial element, because we see that leadership always want revenue generating partnerships. And of course, that's important, but it's equally as important to either align with the mission, the vision, the values of the institution, and really make sure that can count, not just focusing on revenue.
Definitely. And because there's, as we said, aligning it to strategy, and we've got these moonshots that we talk about a lot at Swinburne, and they're part of this Horizon 2025 strategy. We've got 4 moonshots. The first 2, for instance, job experience. The second one is every graduate gets a job. Those speak very much to the employability piece. So if we didn't really assign a shadow value to work placement and a graduate employment opportunity, we wouldn't really be able to really accurately measure. And so, as I said, it might be something that just every business needs to decide what is their priority area. But if it's just revenue, that's pretty easy. That's probably you pull a report of and that's an easy ranking if it's just based on that. This is probably a bit more complex and layers a little bit more complexity around trying to measure your partners.
Mm-hmm. You talked about different tiers, and with the account management framework, you've created this tiered structure of partners. Can you tell us a bit more about what the tiers are and how you allocated them or how you landed on these structures?
Sure. There are 4 tiers. Essentially, there's 6 criteria, total of 24 points available, and the partners are ranked against. We measure and tick off all the various points per criteria. From a tier 1, a strategic partner would have anything between 18 and 24 points. These are the partnerships that really span across the university. They're deep partnerships, heavily embedded within the fabric of the uni. There's multiple tiers of activity. As an industry engagement team, we service these partnerships and make sure that we're really driving the ROI, but also implementing governance around them. Because they are multifaceted, it means that all various areas are doing different things. And so you need a coordinated approach on these bigger partners. Our tier 2s, we call them our major partners, and that's the partners that rank anything between 12 and 17 points. Again, really great partners doing a lot of really important work across multiple areas, just probably don't have the breadth or the ROI that the tier 1s have. And these are often driven by the area where the majority of the work happens. It could be an employability partner that's doing really good work and then does also some research and some other things, but the majority of the work is sitting within that area. So that area will keep driving that partnership. It's not something that necessarily, for instance, our team need to be hands-on involved in. We just assist in terms of support, because that's the other thing, was for us to be able to really service and drive these partnerships for Swinburne in a sort of consistent approach. Then our tier 3s, anything between 6 and 11 points, are really good partners that work primarily in one area, and it's great, and they're delivering and driving results for that area, but they don't have the sort of the span and reach of some of the other partnerships. And basically anything else falls into a tier 4.
Yeah. And you've used this tiering to allocate all kinds of partners interacting with Swinburne?
So yes, by last count, it's about 160 partners that we've put through the system, trying to rank them. You know, it gives us a good view of what we're doing, and it tells us the ones that are really great. Tier 3 partners are doing great activity in the one area, and it allows us also to identify opportunity. And that's the thing, they might be working really well in that one area, but maybe through discussions and further engagement, they might be able to stretch beyond that. And our tier 1s at the same time, you've got the top range, but they are requiring us to be able to ensure we're on top of them because of the complexity of the partnership, to ensure that the partner is getting a good experience as well working with the university, because it is a big business, and to ensure that their experience is a good one and that we keep them at tier 1s. And your tier 2, there's a lot of the ones that we identify as high potential that are in our tier 2s, and we basically put them on a heat map as well, so we can see which are the areas where there's opportunity for growth. It's been a very useful exercise.
Yeah, I can imagine. And while I think when you talk about it, it sounds so comprehensive and so complete, and it probably makes people think, oh, why don't I create something like this for my university? But how long did this process take?
Look, it's definitely the better part of a year. And then the actual tiering of it itself, it takes a while, because the data is the key here, where the various data sets are. That took a while even to identify what data we had and what we could use. So depending on the level of maturation that a CRM has in a university, it can be an easier job, I would say. But I also think it just depends on the complexity of the criteria. Initially, I think the first draft, we had about 9 or 10 criteria, and then realised we couldn't do that, had to simplify a little bit. Depending on the number of criteria one applies and on the availability of data, it can be a quicker job.
Yeah. And the scoring system that you used, that was connected back to the assessment criteria to which you assigned values. Is that correct?
That's correct. And we developed these automated systems for ourselves to just plug it in, answer questions. We created all the tools that could make our life easier in being able to quickly plug in the information and spit out the result for us. And we've just gone through a second phase again. And for new partners, it's widened it a little bit. And it was, again, new results that we didn't expect. A few popped up that we were not expecting to even tier one, which is always a surprise, especially for the industry engagement team, because we should know them all. And surprise that comes up and goes, oh, look, they're doing way more activity than we thought. So it's always a really interesting exercise.
Definitely. You mentioned you went through a second phase at the moment, but how are you applying the framework on a day-to-day basis? How often might you review the structures, decide what kind of resources to give to different partners?
That's a great question. So the tiering in of itself is quite time consuming still because of the different data sets and trying to correlate the data. However, the purpose of this is to resource the partners and so make sure that our tier ones are all looked after and we know who's doing what. The governance is in place so that we can ensure that any opportunities are being managed, but we also try to make sure that the customer journey for them is a good one as well, that we are responding to what the partner wants. And ideally, this whole thing should lead to, and we're already starting to do it informally, a reward and recognition program. So that's what we're in the process of developing. So to really bring them even more into the fold, our partners, deepen the partnerships even more, but also as a recognition and a thank you for all, especially all the activity that the tier ones and tier twos are doing with Swinburne. We've already started it informally, as I said, inviting them to more events, hospitality opportunities to meet our Vice Chancellor, that sort of thing. And we know that the partners really appreciate this. And it's something that we've already kicked off, although we're still working on the actual structure of the rewards program.
Yeah, that's the next challenge.
Yes, that's right.
There's a couple of questions from the audience, which are both actually related. It's around, have you built this framework or embedded it into your CRM system, or is it a separate system? And if you have embedded it, maybe you can tell us a bit how.
I would love to have embedded it in a CRM system. Look, that is, I would say that's a stage 3 idea. To answer the question briefly, yes, it's what we would like to do. No, we haven't done it yet, but it is definitely the integration of some of the data sets is what we will be looking at, not only because it makes the job easier, but even if we weren't tiering the partners anyway, you could have, even at a glance, almost you'd be able to see more or less if a partner's anything between a tier 1 and 2. I could almost look at it and decide pretty quickly if I have the information in front of me.
Yeah.
So
with this classification and with using these structures, they have a lot of benefits, but are there any maybe limitations to using a system like this, where sometimes maybe you might have a relationship with a partner that's really valued, but if you applied the points, it might not be a tier 1, but it maybe is a tier 1 from different perspectives. Have you faced any of these limitations?
Yes, I think there's always the exception to the rule that falls outside of any criteria and framework that has been worked on. I think the framework in of itself would need tweaking, and we have reviewed definitely some of the bands, and we've reviewed some of the criteria. We're talking about weighting some of the criteria differently as well. It's not to skew the data, but it's to recognize an additional layer of engagement that the partner might have. There are ones that fall outside probably of, but some of them are really high potential though. So even that category should not be discounted simply because it doesn't fit within the framework that is existing. We definitely have some that we consider important.
Yes. Maybe last question. What steps do you take to determine the shadow value for activities that do not generate revenue? You mentioned that it was quite challenging. Maybe you could mention how you did that.
Sure, and I'll use a good example, for instance, our employability, all the activities that we do for the work integrated learning. A lot of that was consultation with our colleagues in the team. So what is a student paid for an average placement? That is showing what an industry partner is actually paying the student. So that would be the shadow value for every placement. Similarly, graduate employment, what's the average salary of our graduate? Obviously, there can be a lot of variance, but we went for an average value. It just gave us something that we could compare across the board. That's why some of these need to be reviewed just to make sure you're keeping on track with the changes. But curriculum advisory, similarly, what would a C-suite attendance or 2 hours of advisory board if we were to pay them, for professional services, that sort of thing. So those are the sorts of the process we went through to make sure that we were using good benchmark for those.
Yeah, thank you. Maybe just very briefly, do you use strategic partnership agreements with all of your tiers?
No, not necessarily. There are some partners that, as we said, work in a specific area and work well, and there's no need for MOUs or other types of agreements. Some others have commercial agreements. And so, for instance, those fall, I'm not saying outside, they need a special consideration on there because we've got absolutely contracted deliverables in the partnership agreement. So we need to be across them. Those are the ones that, for instance, the tier ones of that sort from an industry engagement team would have an additional close management on that. But no, not as a blanket rule across them all, no.
Thank you. Daria, as we reflect a bit on what you've shared with us, I'm wondering, do you have any advice or recommendations for other organizations that are looking to implement similar approaches or undertake these strategic approaches to partnerships?
I think looking at it very much as a holistic approach is really important because there, as you mentioned before, if we're just looking at revenue, yes, okay, that's pretty easy to measure, but it doesn't necessarily give the entirety of the picture of the work that a partner is doing. Similarly, I think the data that one has available will probably make the job easier or harder, depending on what you're doing. So they have to be comprehensive but simple. I know it sounds like a contrast, and that was the challenge, making sure we were considering the right elements but not making it too complicated for ourselves. I think that's probably the best advice I'd have to give.
Yes, that's really good advice. Especially, I think undertaking such an endeavor can be really challenging and it can seem like a mountain of work you have to do. But I guess taking this stepwise approach and iterating constantly will
Iterating
help.
is very important. Yeah, definitely.
Yes. There were a couple of other questions around, is there any way to learn more about your approach or learn more about the framework if you're planning to publish something or release something? But I don't know if you have any thoughts on that.
Not at the moment, but you never know. I work with the UN as close as we've come to actually articulating it out in public. As we said, it was the sort of an internal mechanism. But as we developed it, we sort of thought that, the principles could be really helpful, especially in the university community. So, yes, we'll see. We'll see what happens in the next steps. At the moment, no, but we might.
Yeah, maybe we can work together to create a case study out of it. Yes,
sounds good.
Great. Thank you, Daria. I think it's really impressive work, and I haven't seen many universities create something like this. I've seen it in companies a bit more. So it's really nice to see such an approach being applied in a university. So I look forward to hearing more about the progress, hearing any more insights, and thank you also for your openness and willingness to share this with us.
Thank you very much, and thank you for hosting. It's been a great opportunity.
Thank you for listening to today's discussion. Follow UIIN on LinkedIn, and if you're enjoying our podcast, make sure to subscribe, rate, and review in your podcast platform of choice to help other people find this content too.